Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today we are looking at a massive study of 130,000 American religious leaders to answer one explosive question. Can your religion predict your politics? We're going to uncover how rabbis and pastors vote compared to the people in their pews and discover the surprising reasons why the person at the pulpit might be far more partisan than the congregation listening to them.
Yeah, it's honestly a really revealing data set.
It totally is. And before we really dive in, I want to say if you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us out. So let's set the stage here with our source material.
Right, so we are looking at a pretty major report from the New York Times from June 2017.
Yeah, based on this landmark study by Ethan Hirsch from Tufts University and Gabriel Molina from Harvard.
And I mean, the sheer scale of the data is what makes this so interesting. They didn't just poll a few people.
No, they built this massive database of 130,000 American religious leaders, mostly Christian and Jewish denominations.
Exactly. And they took all those names and actually cross-referenced them with public voter registrations.
Which is such an ambitious project. But real quick, we definitely need to put a disclaimer out there for everyone listening.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
You and I are strictly looking at the data today as, impartial observers.
Right.
We are not endorsing any political party, Democrat or Republican. We aren't critiquing how anyone votes or, judging anyone's theology.
No, not at all. The data is just a mirror. Right?
Yeah.
It reflects how American society is structured. We're just looking at the mirror.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the study found that for some groups, your religion is a fiercely accurate predictor of your politics.
It really is.
Predicting politics from religion in some of these groups is like guessing a sports fan's favorite food based on the city on their jersey.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes the correlation is just undeniably strong.
That's a great way to put it. And if we look at the left-leaning side of things first, the numbers are wild.
Yeah, take Unitarian pastors, for example. What did the data show there?
So for Unitarian pastors, over 70% of them were registered Democrats.
Wow, over 70%, that's huge.
Yeah, it's a massive block. And you see that same kind of predictability in specific Jewish denominations, too.
Right.
Like, among rabbis in conservative Judaism, 70% are registered Democrats.
Okay.
And then for Reform Judaism rabbis, it's even higher. It jumps to 80%.
80%. I mean, that is just a commanding majority.
Yeah.
You walk into one of those congregations and you basically know exactly where the leader stands politically.
Yeah, statistically speaking, it's almost a sure bet.
But does that same rigid predictability hold true for conservative theologies?
It absolutely does.
Yeah.
Just, in completely different denominations.
Right, obviously.
Like, if you look at pastors in the Assemblies of God denomination or the Presbyterian Church of America, they are highly, highly likely to be registered Republicans.
Okay, so why? I mean, why is the correlation so incredibly strong in these specific groups?
Well, it largely comes down to institutional self-selection.
Meaning, the institution acts as a filter.
Exactly. These specific denominations have very clear, historically established public postures. So a person doesn't just stumble into becoming a Unitarian pastor by accident, right?
Right. They choose it because it already aligns with what they believe.
Exactly. By the time they actually reach a leadership position, their political identity and their religious identity are just completely fused together.
But what about massive, diverse religious groups? Does a wider net just dilute the data, or is something else going on?
That is the perfect question to ask here.
Because America is huge. I have a hard time believing theology alone keeps everyone in perfect political lockstep across the whole country.
Right. And what's fascinating here is that the neat, predictable formula we just talked about, it completely falls apart with those massive groups.
Yeah, like the Catholics. I was waiting for the Catholics to come up in this data.
Oh, they do. And the results are basically a 50-50 split.
Really? Just right down the middle?
Pretty much. You cannot look at a Catholic priest and accurately predict their voting record the way you can with a Unitarian pastor.
Wow.
And it's similar for Orthodox rabbis. They skew slightly Democratic, sure,
Yeah.
but it is nowhere near that 80% majority we saw in Reform Judaism.
Wait, but the Catholic Church has this totally centralized global doctrine. They literally read the same catechism everywhere in the world.
They do.
So how does a priest in Texas end up voting so completely differently from a priest in Massachusetts? They get the exact same
Geography. Yeah. Geography and local demographics just completely overpower theology in these broader groups.
So the local culture just seeps in.
Exactly. If you're a Catholic priest living in a deep red rural county in Texas, you're constantly surrounded by local cultural norms and conservative values.
Right, you're breathing that air every day.
Right. And that environment eventually shapes your political registration. But put that same priest, same training, same doctrine in a deep blue urban center in Massachusetts.
And they vote Democrat.
Exactly. The local political culture is a way stronger indicator of their politics than their allegiance to Rome.
That is so interesting because it means the denomination might say one thing on paper, but the people actually running the local parishes are, they're human beings living in specific zip codes.
Yeah, daily reality just totally overpowers abstract doctrine.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting because the juiciest part of this study isn't actually about the leaders living in a vacuum.
No, not at all.
It's about how the leaders compare to the everyday people sitting right in front of them in the pews.
Right, the partisan gap. This was probably the biggest finding of the whole project.
And the finding is that religious leaders are significantly more partisan than their congregations.
Significantly, like drastically more partisan.
Let's look at the Episcopalian numbers because this example blew my mind.
Yeah, it's the perfect illustration. So the data shows that 76% of Episcopalian pastors identify as Democrats.
Okay, so a massive supermajority of the leadership.
Right. But when they looked at the Episcopalian congregants, the people actually showing up every Sunday, only 55% of them identified as Democrats.
That is a 21-point gap.
It's huge.
Just think about the practical reality of that for a second. You are the pastor, you're a registered Democrat, and pretty much all your peers in leadership agree with you.
Yeah.
But then you step up to the pulpit, you look out at the room, and nearly half the audience fundamentally disagrees with your political framework.
Yeah, the psychological friction there has to be intense.
It has to be. I mean, culturally, we usually assume a church or a synagogue is this warm, cozy echo chamber.
Right, where everyone is on the exact same wavelength.
But the data proves it's actually full of this constant, low-grade ideological tension. So why?
Why the gap?
Yeah, why is the person holding the microphone always more extreme or partisan than the people sitting in the chairs?
It really comes down to the process of becoming a leader, the professionalization and ordination process.
So seminary.
Exactly. Think about seminary. It's years of intense education, debate, and being totally immersed in this specialized environment.
Right.
That process naturally sharpens your worldview. You are forced to figure out exactly where you stand on every complex social and ethical issue.
It's like, well, it's kind of like an economics professor compared to a freshman undergrad.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Like the professor spent decades hardening their specific economic views. They live and breathe the ideology.
Right.
But the freshman is just sitting there trying to grasp basic supply and demand so they can pass the test.
Exactly. The pulpit essentially has a PhD in the ideology, while the pew is just looking for some basic moral guidance to, get through the week.
So the depth of training is actually a polarizing filter.
Yes. The average congregant doesn't spend 40 hours a week dissecting theology. Their political identity is moderated by their job, their kids' school, their neighbors.
Right, they have a million other things influencing them.
But the leader has merged their job, their faith, and their worldview into one highly partisan identity.
So the leader is actually the outlier in the room.
Statistically, yes.
The congregation is much closer to the moderate general public, while the leadership reflects the extreme edge.
Which is why there's that 21-point gap. The training process literally filters out the moderates.
Wow. So what does this all mean? When we put the spreadsheets down, what's the big takeaway?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it proves something really fundamental about human behavior.
Which is?
Religions do not exist in a vacuum. They are deeply, inextricably embedded in culture.
Yeah, you can't just separate the faith from the demographics.
No, you really can't. Religious identity isn't this isolated program running in the background. It's a messy mixture of geography, demographics, and politics.
It's a two-way street. I mean, belief shapes the environment, sure, but the environment aggressively shapes the belief right back.
Exactly, like we saw with the Catholic priests.
Yeah.
You cannot separate their voter registration from their zip code. The local culture acts like a gravitational pull.
It really reframes how you look at pretty much any institutional leadership.
It does. It shows how fragile community dynamics actually are. It's just a constant negotiation between the ideal doctrine and the messy reality of the people in the room.
Yeah. Okay, let's do a quick recap of the journey we just took today.
Sounds good.
We started with this monumental data set of 130,000 American religious leaders. And we saw that for groups like Unitarian pastors or Reform Judaism rabbis.
Their religion was a highly accurate predictor of progressive politics.
Exactly. And groups like the Assemblies of God reliably leaned conservative. But then we looked at the massive anomalies.
Right, where centralized theology gets completely hijacked by local geography.
The zip code overpowered the Catechism.
It really did.
And finally, we uncovered that huge partisan gap between the pulpit and the pews. The rigorous filter of seminary creates leaders who are statistically way more partisan than the moderate people listening to them.
They're basically living in two different political realities.
They really are. And as we wrap up, we always like to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to chew on, something that builds on the data.
Yeah, and for this one, I keep thinking about the future of these institutions.
Okay, lay it on us.
If religious leaders are consistently more politically partisan than their congregations, how might this gap eventually impact the way congregations choose their future leaders? Will the varied voices in the pews eventually force the pulpit to become more moderate? Or will the highly partisan pulpit slowly change the politics of the pews?
Does the room eventually change the speaker, or does the speaker inevitably change the room?
Exactly.
That is brilliant. Definitely something to think about the next time you find yourself sitting in a crowd listening to someone at the front.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today for this deep dive. We love unpacking these hidden realities with you.
It's been a genuine pleasure. Keep questioning the data, and we will catch you next time.